Hello, everyone. This is Jessica Thacker with ASA University, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Part 2 of Meet the Workforce 2018 Workforce, How to Connect, Communicate, and Coach the Five-Generation Workforce. This is a topic that we are constantly asked about and is top of mind for the membership. And even more timely as we discovered the staggering statistics that half of our industry's employees will be retiring within the next 17 years. Finding good people, retaining the best, and managing a productive workforce has never been more critical. Please note that this is a 1-hour webinar and being recorded for replay. Everyone registered will receive a follow-up email with notification as to when the replay is available and instructions on how to access it. We have allotted 50 minutes for today's presentation, so we have time for questions as well. Please know that questions are encouraged during this program, and we'll also have time at the conclusion for questions as well. The GoToWebinar control panel includes a window pane in which you may pose questions through the use of your computer's keyboard. If needed, you can minimize and maximize the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the orange arrow in the upper left-hand corner. And with that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Diane Thielfoldt. Diane?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining me, and a special welcome back to those of you who participated in the March webinar. My name is Diane Thielfoldt. I'm the co-founder of the Learning Cafe, and we partner with our clients to engage and retain talent, to develop leaders and mentors, and to bridge the workplace generation gap. For 18 years, we've researched, written, spoken about, and facilitated learning experiences about the changing workforce. And what I can tell you is it continues to change. We're best known for our practical tools and skills that help managers and employees deal productively with multiple generations, because for the first time in history, you are leading 4, possibly 5 different generations. You are truly managing or working with a mix. It's my goal today to discuss specific actions and strategies to bridge the workplace generation gap through communication, climate, and career. And while I don't want to be repetitive, I want to very quickly introduce the 2018 workforce, or reintroduce perhaps for some of you, and create context for our conversation today. As we get started, I want to thank those of you that took the time to review the pre-read, and I hope you found the information interesting. I also want to make you aware that the dates that you just read about, I hope you haven't committed them to memory yet, have shifted. On March 1st, the Pew Research Center released their most recent report on the millennial generation. They've decided it's time to determine a cutoff point between millennials and the post-millennial generation. Turning 37 this year, the oldest millennials are well into adulthood, and they first entered that adulthood before today's youngest adults were born. So in order to keep the millennial generation analytically meaningful and to begin looking at what might be unique about the next cohort, Pew will use 1996 as the last birth year for millennials. Anyone born between 1981 and 1996 will be considered a millennial, and anyone born from 1997 onward will be part of the new generation. You're certainly on the leading edge of our shifting demographics, and I'm wondering if any of you just learned that you're part of a different generation than you thought when we began 2 minutes ago. So let's get started and talk about who is the 2018 workforce. Currently, there are 5 different generations vying for their place at work. These groups have been shaped through shared experiences in a period of time, culture, and economies. As a result, they tend to form similar motivations. The silent generation, born before 1946, grew up in the aftermath of the Great Depression and World War II and experienced the golden age of radio. Called silent because they are known to be a generation of action, not posturing, they are followed by the boisterous boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. Boomers saw the explosion of the suburbs, the invention of television, and the race for space. They have a shared history of women's liberation and Vietnam. Gen X, or the MTV generation, was born between 1965 and 1980. And they were influenced by the Gulf War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then along came the millennials, and now the next gen or post-millennial generation. Couple things that you need to know. First of all, your generation is designated by your birth year, but truly know that birth date does not dictate personality. A generation is created when the birth rate spikes or drops, and it's important to recognize that it's a social science. It isn't precise and exact, so we look at a cusp of about 2 or 3 years between each generation. Know that the experiences of your youth begin to shape your point of view, and our age and life stage also dictate some of our needs and preferences. Appreciating generational dynamics provides a way to find common ground with employees from all generations. And I'm wondering what you might be noticing about your workforce demographics. The age structure is changing. Boomers are remaining in the workforce longer. Gen Xers are taking on new roles and responsibilities. Millennials are entering the workplace and moving into leadership roles. And the next gen, or post-millennial generation, is knocking at your door. At the same time, many organizational structures have gotten flatter, and there's an intense team-based collaboration, which puts workers of all generations in closer interaction, and some would say in competition for the same role. Millennials are less afraid of failure and less driven by financial incentives, so if you aren't able to meet their needs, they'll look for an employer that will. This, coupled with the challenges of implementing successful succession plans for retiring senior employees, could significantly impact your business's growth strategy. Are you perhaps hearing a call for action? Our conversation today is all about action. Our first webinar covered demographics and the events and experiences that shaped each generation. Today, we will address that call to action and what it means from a talent perspective to you and your organization. At the Learning Cafe, our bottom line is competitive advantage through your people. As the massive boomer generation exits the workforce, your competitive advantage will become even more tied to your ability to understand and capitalize on what motivates your people and make that work for your business. So what do you do? Well, according to the cartoon in the New Yorker, we have someone from my generation get in touch with someone from your generation. And what do you imagine we're going to discuss? Most likely our challenges. And the most frequently expressed challenge of managing a 5-generation workforce begins with communication. So let's begin with communication. Shifting demographics require a shift in how and when we communicate. We need to flex and employ media and methods that may appeal more to others than ourselves. You can no longer use a universal language in communicating with your team. You need to learn which team members prefer which methods. Does someone prefer a face-to-face meeting? Would someone else rather get a text messages? We know that members of the mature workforce have likely worked in a hierarchical environment where the flow of information was regulated and it came mostly from the top down. Development of personal relationships were the routes to moving up the ladder. Mature workers, the baby boomers, influence through position and hierarchy. The emerging workforce has grown up with the internet and on-demand access to information. They're not so impressed by hierarchy or tops-down communication. Frankly, the millennials are more used to going straight to the source, not through layers of managers. They expect instant access to information. The millennials and the next generation are coming of age using social media. It's clear based on how they make connections and share information online. They are simply wired to communicate differently than those who preceded them. The emerging workforce influences through networks and communities, not position and hierarchy. And feedback is arguably the most essential information that leaders communicate. And we have generational preferences from the silent generation who said, hey, no news is good news, nobody's calling my name, to the millennial generation that wants fast, frequent, and in-the-moment feedback. Crave in-the-moment, fast, frequent. So your methods and your messages matter. A blended workforce also suggests that we have varying views of what work is. And as you read across the top of the slide, you see that the silent's view of work was that work is a privilege. You got a job, you kept that job. And that's in contrast to the live to work baby boomers and the Gen Xers who said, really? I work to live. And the millennials are telling us that their work style and lifestyle are blurred. And for the next gen, we're expecting that they're always on in the workplace. Our view of work and life balance is interesting. Boomers tend to believe that hard work shows commitment to the organization. Gen X may see work as fixed, but they want time for flexibility, for important family and personal situations. And millennials say, work's anytime, any place. Work is what I do, not where I go. So our views of leadership are different as well, and how we prefer to be managed varies from generation to generation. And that's what you see described across the bottom of the slide, moving from top-down preferences to entrepreneurialism as you move from left to right on the slide. So ask yourself, think a moment about your management style. Are you more formal or informal? Are you more hands-on or are you a bit laid back? Do you command or do you coach? And then ask yourself, how's your style working for you? How are you energizing and empowering your employees? How we define career success also looks different from generation to generation. So our communication is different, our preferences for workplace climate are different, and our view of career are different across the generations. Boomers often define career success as job security, a clear career path, slow and steady progress over the decades. At this point, Gen Xers probably feel they've earned their place, and it's up to them to manage their careers, building those skills portfolios to provide job relevance and have portability so they can take it if they need to. And they may, in fact, be just a bit impatient with their younger coworkers. Millennials, yep, we see that they're anxious to learn, to grow, and to take on more. They're puzzled with phrases like pay your dues. Sometimes other generations struggle with millennial enthusiasm, feeling that millennial workers don't know enough to be promoted or are too eager for that promotion. As leaders, it's important that we consider definitions and views of career other than our own. And we cannot choose to do nothing. I can't overemphasize this enough. We must, if we do nothing else, we must coach. Coaching is the conversation that managers use to engage and develop willing employees who want to grow and develop. And you're thinking, okay, that's not everybody on my team. I would suggest it's most of your team. Coaching is used to develop skills that are critical to the employee's current or immediate next position. Coaching helps people perform better at their current jobs. And who doesn't want to excel? Today's challenges include communication, climate, and career. And I want to share some very generation-specific recommendations. So beginning with communication. And yes, your method of communication matters, as does the message, but not as much as the frequency and consistency of that communication. So here's what matters to each generation in the workplace. Some tips for communicating with the silent generation. This generation appreciates formality and protocol in the workplace. So be polite and courteous, maybe a little bit more polite and courteous than you're used to. Show your respect for members of the silent generation. Acknowledge that they've earned it. Focus the conversation on work. Be positive and direct. Try to eliminate words like should and must from your language. Don't box them in. And silents are sensitive to corporate BS. So frankly, say what you mean and mean what you say. Earn their commitment to your communication by asking, not assuming. And how about communicating with the baby boomers? Well, boomers have a preference for warm communication, which means in person, face-to-face, at the very least, pick up the phone, make eye contact, and give them your full attention. Demonstrate your respect, work to build a relationship, and pay attention to your body language and nonverbal gestures. Believe me, they're noticing. For boomers, remember, the purpose of a meeting is to discuss and dialogue. For some of us, the purpose of a meeting is to get in and get out. So remember to be inclusive of your baby boomers that are in the meetings. Support their desire to be fresh and innovative, to be ahead of the curve, if you will. Lighten up, encourage humor on your team. Use language that's invitational, may, would like to. And finally, remember that boomers are aware of and pay attention to protocol, chain of command, and diplomacy. What does that suggest to you in terms of communication? Our MTV generation, our Gen Xers, grew up with video games, pagers, cell phones, so you can use technology, whether it's email or text, to communicate. Their preference is for cooler communication than boomers or silence. When you communicate with Gen Xers, communicate with candor. Get to the point, get to the bottom line, net it out. Provide candid feedback, and provide that candid feedback frequently. Frankly, Gen Xers want the answer to the question, how am I doing? Give them space, and let's not have any more paying our dues, earning our stars and stripes. Lighten up a bit and resist micromanaging. Encourage their entrepreneurial aptitude and attitude. Speak to their independence with messages that say, you can do it your way. There's not a lot of rules here. We're not terribly corporate-like. Encourage them to make a difference. And a few tips for communicating with the millennial generation. Millennials grew up with the internet, the iPod, and eventually the iPhone and iPad. Their office equipment includes laptops, tablets, and smartphones. They expect you to use their technology to communicate. Help them to focus and pay attention to the communication. Provide supervision and structures. Hint for the Gen Xers in our audience, perhaps provide more supervision and structure than you would prefer to receive. Become a trusted resource by guiding their decision-making process. Clearly communicate goals and expectations. Say it and say it again. Make sure that they understand what's expected, and then provide frequent feedback, pulse checks to make sure they know that they're on track. Speak to their collegial, collaborative nature with expressions that sound like you and your peers can turn this place around. Yes, teamwork is important to us. You can work together. Pay attention to their civic side and the mission of your organization. Share your vision. Ask them to participate. Let them know that they can make a difference. So a quick pop quiz on communication. No need to get anxious, just some thoughts about communication as you communicate with 4 or 5 different generations. How many of these phrases have you heard or have you said in the last 30 days? Be honest, right? Pay your dues, you've got to earn it. No one gets promoted that fast ever. Perhaps now is the time to adjust your thinking or broaden your view and think about the impact of your language. I strongly recommend you ban each of these expressions from your organization's vocabulary. Nothing kills energy, enthusiasm, and engagement more quickly. We hire people because of their innovative, creative thought processes. And the first time that they share a new idea, the first thing we say is, oh yeah, but that's not how we do it here. Eliminate these expressions. Over the next 10 years, engaging, developing, and retaining talent will be the biggest challenge facing leaders. So I want to share some specific, generation-specific engagement strategies, how to engage and retain talent across the generations. This slide, which I introduced in the last webinar, is a quick snapshot of the research that we've done at the Learning Cafe to identify the drivers of engagement across the generations. What is it that inspires, draws people in, rather than pushes them away? And what would cause employees of all generations to disconnect, to disengage, or possibly to depart. The 4 drivers were most frequently selected from a field of 24. So if you zeroed right in on pay as a driver for millennial engagement, I don't want you to think that they're the only generation that wants to be paid. Pay appears 5th or 6th on each of the other generations list. And we know many millennials are in entry-level positions, and in fact, approximately 1/3 of the generation is under or unemployed. So yes, pay is important to millennials. What you'll quickly notice are the similarities across the generations and some of the more subtle or nuanced differences. It is first the work, the challenge, the stimulation, and the variety that engages and satisfies. Boomers want to be challenged, Gen Xers want to be intellectually stimulated, and millennials want you to change it up. But it is the work that engages and satisfies across all 4 generations. So a couple of questions to ask. How can you do more of what engages and less of what does not? How do you demonstrate your appreciation or let others know that they count? Lack of appreciation disengages or causes all 4 generations to disconnect. So perhaps it's not surprising that 86% of the U.S. workforce describes themselves as unappreciated. How do you demonstrate to your team that you're a good boss? I want to share some specific tips to engage and appreciate each generation. Let's start with the silent generation. Don't take them for granted. Right? Yes, they may have been with you for a while, but they have so much to offer. And if they're particularly tenured, what you're probably noticing is that they are unconsciously competent. That means when they do their work, it's second nature. What you can do is encourage their knowledge sharing by asking them to work out loud, to explain what's in their head as they go through each step of a task or the decision-making process. Help them to teach you and your team by asking them questions like, what are your tools? What tips do you have to offer? What techniques have worked for you? Are there patterns or trends that you've discovered that we should be aware of? How did you learn what you know? And here's a hint. They're pretty much guaranteed to say, I learned it from experience. So get prepared to dig in and find out what type of experience is most valuable, what they've learned about what to do and what not to do, and have them share that with your team and team members. Be sure to link their work and their meaningful contribution to your organization's bottom line performance. It matters to them. To express your appreciation, the silent generation describes themselves as the least appreciated generation. I used to know something, but there doesn't seem to be much need for it anymore. It's particularly important to encourage and appreciate the silent generation's contribution. And what about those baby boomers? Value their experience and their work ethic. Their number one complaint about other generations, they don't have any work ethic, which is to say, they don't have my boomer work ethic. Don't take them for granted. Don't count them out. This generation, like all generations, wants to make an active, important contribution. Find out what they want to do. What do they want to learn about? What do they want to be involved with? Ask them. They'll tell you. Inquire about their challenges. Help them determine how they add value. Customize your engagement actions to their needs. Remember, this generation is sandwiched, as are the Gen Xers, so offer them options and flexibility. Leverage their experience in thought leadership roles. Ask them to speak at conferences. Get them involved in forward-looking strategy. Help them to connect your traditional processes to the leading-edge technology you're integrating into the workplace. Encourage them to mentor, to coach. Consider reverse mentoring, where your younger colleagues mentor their more tenured coworkers. Ideally, mentoring is beneficial and mutually satisfying. It goes both ways. A focus group participant said to us a couple of years ago, "Why do I have to fill out a development plan every year?" Well, why indeed? Try shifting to a legacy plan that asks boomers, what are the 2 things you want to teach to your colleagues this year? Encourage and acknowledge them for sharing their legacy knowledge. Boomers are lifelong learners, and this workforce group responds best to the idea at remaining at the top of their game rather than messages that say, watch out, you're falling behind. They want to remain on the fresh, innovative, and on the leading edge. Many boomers do put work first. They've defined themselves by their career. So appreciate and recognize their contribution and how it makes a difference. And know that the boomer generation added 1 full month to our workplace calendar year. So it's the time to think about doing other things. Boomers are concerned and proactive about staying fresh in almost every part of their lives, fitness, appearance, health, and well-being. So why not at work as well? And spotlight the personal fulfillment that boomers are looking for in their work. How do you engage the Gen Xer? How do you retain them? Don't crowd them. They're experienced employees. They have enough work experience to be independent performers, and that's what they prefer. They are generally especially sensitive to being micromanaged. Make it okay to make a lateral move, to take a step back to acquire a new skill. Try out a part-time role to balance work with life needs. Up is not the only way in an organization. Remind Gen Xers that now's the time to avoid being pigeonholed. Help them to broaden their skill sets with goals of developing them broadly, versatility, and deeply, mastery. Help them build that versatility by adding knowledge and skills to their portfolios. Support mastery, and for functional technical experts, now's the time to supplement that mastery with versatility. Think about broadening those skills, going organization-wide to gain credibility. Ask everyone, but especially ask your established Gen Xers if they have skills and knowledge that they're not using on the job. Speak to skill utilization and an experience portfolio that may include lateral moves to different functions, locations, and roles. Mid-career is a significant time. It's now or never to eliminate the derailers, polish your resume and skills, and make sure that your organization has an accurate take on your capabilities. Help Xers to learn what their reputation is. How do others see them? And to appreciate Gen Xers, recognize them with mid-career coaching, acknowledge their independence and respect their desire for work and life balance. Give them 360 feedback to learn more about who they are and how they're seen. Acknowledge and take advantage of their entrepreneurial spirit. Give them a startup endeavor, get something that they can take on and run on their own. And remember that every generation wants to be respected. And while Gen Xers may have raised the flag on don't micromanage me, I've yet to find a generation that wants to be micromanaged. And what about those millennials? How do we engage and retain them? Well, let's start with the fact that many millennials are doing entry-level jobs. And yes, they need to be done. So make sure that your millennial knows why and what's in it for them. And don't misunderstand the millennial who says, I want a raise, I want a promotion. Very often these phrases are substitutes for not understanding how the system works or how their current role will feed their longer-term success. Let them know that they will continue to learn and grow in the organization. Having less work experience means that they have fewer habits. Less of that, oh, that won't work here. So open your mind and begin to benefit from their new view or perspective. Innovation and creativity, 2 things that we oftentimes hear organizations say they desperately crave, are often byproducts of collaboration. Structure the work and the workplace to maximize group work. Millennials prefer a collaborative work environment. People who are newer to work often appreciate and need information about how we work here. They want to be clear on expectations about relationships with clients, colleagues, and most of all, how to be successful. Provide access to important others. Leverage powerful examples of role models and job experts. Put your millennials in front of your successful senior leaders. When in doubt, ask. Each person in your work group is unique. Don't dismiss someone who has less experience. Learn about them, their priorities, their goals, what they bring to the work. And for millennials, work is part of life, not all of life. If there are logistical barriers to providing lots of flexibility, brainstorm together with others how to meet both personal and business needs. For example, designate a collaboration time, which are days or blocks of time when everyone is in the office to work together. Aside from those, perhaps the work is more flexible. And how do you express your appreciation for the millennial generations? Well, millennials describe a good boss as someone who appreciates their confidence, challenges and stretches them, and helps them to pay attention by offering guidance, structure, and prioritization. Millennials will stay with you if they see opportunity for advancement, a variety of experiences, job satisfaction, and salary. Millennials want to develop, they want career options, and they want to grow professionally. So we all need to be aware of the actions our behavior inspires and ask ourselves, what can we do every day to create productive, energizing work environments? On a quick pop quiz for us, again, just a self-assessment to give you a sense of gaining some insight into how the generations describe a good boss and how do you measure up. And after you've run through this, after you've completed it, use the questions as conversation starters with your team members to get their feedback on how engaging, inspiring, and motivating are you? What are you doing well? What would they prefer that you do more of or less of? Why have these conversations? Well, the very good news about engaged employees is that they will give you their loyalty and discretionary effort if you foster their growth, show your appreciation, share that compelling vision, help them paint their way into that vision, and you're trustworthy. So as leaders, you have incredible opportunity. You can begin the dialogue to bridge the gap, and you might use some of these questions to initiate conversation. Today, 85% of us are interacting with at least 3 generations each and every day. Successfully communicating with, working with, and building relationships with multiple generations clearly demands some flexibility. Flexibility in 3 particular areas: communication, climate, and career. I want to offer recommendations that build bridges, not stereotypes. And these are recommendations that we found to be successful across the generations. So you might think of them as the best of the best recommendations to build a bridge, not a stereotype. You know that your messages matter. Confirm everyone's communication preferences. Is it in person, by phone? Is it electronic? And as often as possible, use connecting in person as your default. So that's when you'll get to know your employees better. Make an effort to know every employee's name, their family members' names, and at least one hobby or outside interest. Once a month, have a 15-minute conversation with each employee, and frequency outweighs duration, so really 15 minutes. Ask them 3 questions. How's it going? What's going well or not so well? What can I do to support you? That's simple. And that question, what can I do to support you, begins to build a relationship. Make sure your employees see the link between their work and your mission, goals, and values. Inspire with positive rather than or else messages. Listen more and talk less. To start these conversations, I've provided a few discussion starters. This is my language, not yours, but do know that these open-ended discussion starters help you to connect, initiate meaningful conversation, and build relationships with team members of all generations. And I would encourage you to add your own questions to the list. As leaders, we need to customize our communication, and we also need to build a climate that fuels engagement. So how, again, do you build bridges, not stereotypes? How do you energize and engage? To create that enjoyable and energizing climate, begin this way. Imagine that your employees are volunteers, not paid employees. Identify what it is about you and your leadership that keeps them coming to work for you. You may prefer an informal, supportive, team-oriented, structured work environment, but do you know what others prefer? Find out. Know that our employees are the first to fall off of our calendar, our agenda, or our to-do list. Make an effort to keep your commitments and appointments with your employees. Frequently express your appreciation for your employees' contributions. Keep a sense of humor, right? Celebrate successes. Encourage relationship building across your team. At least once a month, tell people why and how their work is significant. Reaffirm the value of the employee to the team, to the department, and to the organization. Consider creating competitive challenges in the spirit of lightening up and having a bit of fun, maybe an outdoor sports activity, or give back to the team, to the company, and to your community. And there are conversation starters to initiate these conversations as well, or discussions. We've found that the question, what makes a great day at work for you, is incredibly powerful. Why? Because first of all, people want to answer this question. They want to talk about their most and least favorite aspects of their work. And as you hear those, it offers you great insight into how to inspire and maximize an engagement. Another question you might consider, asking your employees, how are you doing at building relationships with your colleagues? What support can I provide? Remember that they're building relationships with members of at least 3 different generations as well. And finally, the importance of coaching. And I guess at the risk of sounding a bit like a broken record, coaching is essential. Establish and communicate your expectations and performance goals. Work with your employees to develop a list of potential projects, assignments that would challenge them, tasks that they want to take on that could enhance their career. Make career conversations a priority. Make arrangements for a quiet place, no interruptions. The focus is on the employee and their career. Ask them 3 questions. What do you like about your work? What talents do you have that are not being used? Are there other projects or assignments that are of interest to you? Confirm that each employee has a career path or a professional development plan. Have a team member spend time with a key customer, come back and talk about the learnings, and make sure that what your team is contributing is meeting those customer or client expectations. Develop a training plan for your team that comprehends the skills they need now to make sure they're skilled in the future. Switch it up to freshen routines, and to get people cross-trained, have your employees switch roles for a half a day or a full day, then meet and discuss what they've learned about what one another do. Schedule power down days. Baby boomers, pay attention to this one. Delegate tasks to team members. Don't do anything that your team members can handle effectively themselves. Delegate, delegate, delegate. And talk about mentors and mentoring. Share the message, many mentors. Encourage your employees and team members to have mentors that include their peers and reverse mentoring opportunities. And here are some tips, again, to start a career conversation that counts. Some questions that you can ask. Being mindful that your millennials are looking for experiences, not necessarily promotions, and your boomers pursued the career ladder. These questions are designed to get you and your team members to discuss career growth and development and what that looks like for each employee. So as you think about building bridges, not stereotypes, think about your communication, how you energize and empower your employees, and the conversations you're having with your employees about their career. And I want to take the last few minutes to talk about specifically the millennial generation. Remember that the oldest millennial is 37, so we should not be surprised that members of the millennial generation are moving into leadership roles. They are, in fact, taking the lead. And I want to share with you that a focus on leadership development, as it was previously done, or as usual, is going to leave you vulnerable to losing the best and brightest of your youthful workforce. So think about the millennial who's the emerging leader, the up-and-coming leader in your organization. If you're like many employers around the world, you might be coming to the conclusion that assigning leadership roles to millennials might be a good idea. If you're not quite there yet, I have some things I want to share with you. Do know that about 20% of millennials in the workforce are already in formal leadership roles. Millennials will shortly be 50% of the U.S. workforce and 75% of the global workforce in 2020. They are our legacy and our future. So the research that we did was to help us understand who are millennial leaders and what are they going to need to be successful. How are they viewed in organizations? And most important, how can organizations leverage their talents and accelerate their effectiveness? As the boomers exit the workplace, there are simply not enough Gen Xers to fill all the leadership roles that are available. So it becomes our opportunity and responsibility to get millennials ready to lead. Here's how they describe themselves. Education and learning is the cornerstone of their success. They strive to be better educated with an emphasis on continued education, college degrees, and certifications. They've been taught how to learn and how to learn quickly. They've grown up with a willingness to adapt to new processes, to try new devices and new apps and new industries as they emerge. There's no time to read an instruction manual. Just try it and see what happens. Their drive is to increase their knowledge and experience all the way around, and that's what leaves them satisfied at the end of the day, or not so satisfied. They see themselves as tech-savvy digital natives. Technology is changing the way business is conducted. They believe they can do business anywhere. They've grown up with technology. They have endless resources to learn, educate, and apply new concepts and ideas. Technology is changing every day. To them, it's not a big deal. You want to change the computer system? Okay. You want to change your order entry system? No big deal. And this is possibly what drives behaviors that exhibit impatience with others who can't adapt as quickly. Millennial leaders and millennials love teamwork. They want to spend time building relationships with team members. They're willing to collaborate, network, and motivate each other to achieve a common goal. They're pushing for more collaboration and cooperation in the workplace. They don't see asking for help as a sign of weakness. They see it as an effective use of resources. Millennials want the best for everyone. They want to apply everything they learn, read, try, and then bring it back to the team to make the team better. So working as a team will become the norm as millennials move into leadership roles. They see great value in that. Millennials also desire balance in work and family lives through flexible schedules. Millennials are task, not time-oriented, so with the technology that's available, they believe work can be done anytime and any place. Productivity will be based on the work that's completed rather than the hours spent at the office. They work effectively on the go. Work and life balance comes with technology and flexibility. Expect that millennials will work hard and play hard. That's how millennials describe themselves. What did we learn when we asked their leaders, other managers, human resources professionals to describe the millennial generation? Well, the consensus from everyone on the strengths of millennials and millennial managers may not surprise you. What comes easily without struggle and first on the list is technology, by a landslide in every focus group and survey we administered. Using it, understanding it, leveraging it, gaining efficiency and speed. Millennials are seen as tech-savvy digital natives who fearlessly change how we're doing business. They are effortless multitaskers who can juggle several tasks at the same time. However, they often expect the same of others, which can be challenging. The other thing to explore is their ability to multitask based on the underpinning of structure, organization, and prioritization, which their managers and leaders will need to provide. Millennials seamlessly connect and network at a personal level with peers. They place value on that connectedness and having broad networks. We describe them as a generation of communicating, exploring, and sharing. We also heard that they're adaptable and flexible. They handle change and direction fairly easily. They're creative and innovative, and they're always looking for ways to do things in a simpler fashion. And they most often do that in collaboration with others. So that's the millennials as described by others, and that's what comes easily to them. What's more difficult? That looks a little different. Challenges for millennials are to supervise and relate to older team members, to gain credibility and to respect. They feel discounted. How do they earn respect and credibility and improve the perception of others, of their generation? How do they put their foot down and lead? How do they acquire the fundamental management skills? Some of them have been promoted without those skills or been promoted more quickly than they were ready. They need to know how to delegate, to do a performance review, to resolve conflict between team members. And finally, they need to understand and deal with hierarchy, bureaucracy, and the status quo. The millennials are moving from impatient to patient with your guidance and structure. Our call to action is to coach and support our millennial leaders with the challenges that they face. Here's a couple quick how-tos, and then I want to take your questions. Encourage millennial leaders to learn about their team members, their experiences, and their goals. It requires them to be listeners, really good listeners, to follow through on the actions, to take responsibility to proactively address immediate needs and requirements of their team. Encourage millennials to communicate and build those relationships in person, to be coaches just as they want to be coached, to understand that different generations have lifestyle differences, home obligations, being sandwiched, providing elder care or child care. So help them to understand who the generations are that they're coaching and that they're coaching or managing and what's important to them. And they can all begin to share with one another. As millennials continue to take on leadership roles, they need management skills. Don't assume they come into the role fully formed. Provide them with talk tracks, job aids, practice sessions. We do such a disservice to new millennial leaders when we direct them to volumes of online resources and we skimp on implementation tips and how-tos. Help them develop their EQ along with their IQ. Coach them through situations and scenarios. And finally, they're challenged by hierarchy, bureaucracy, and the status quo. And sometimes I think everyone is. They're described as impatient, intolerant of bureaucracy, politically tone deaf. Whatever you call it, millennials have a reputation for struggling with the status quo. They often describe themselves as coming up short when it comes to making the impact they so deeply desire. There's much more to the story than them being young and in a hurry or butting heads with a complacent organization mired in that's how we've always done it. Ironically, millennials bring education, updated functional knowledge, and zeal for making their mark that organizations so desire. sometimes the gap is about them having bright ideas, insight, and fresh experiences. And the stakeholders and senior leaders in an organization have been there, done that, and don't impress easily. Millennials need to understand that to be the unstoppable agents of change that they want to be, they need to work within the organization to boost their collaboration, visibility, trustworthiness, and credibility. So how to win the race for the best millennial leadership? Millennial leaders benefit coaching, the things that are in the blue box on the left-hand side of the slide, and they benefit from skill building, the things that are listed in the green box on the right-hand side of the slide. Ask yourself, is your organization prepared for millennial leaders? Are you doing everything you can to coach and mentor the next generation of leaders? Because now it's your opportunity to share with your organization, your team, and your understanding of generational leadership. And I want to pause here and ask what your questions are, and then we'll revisit the opportunity that you have. Just want to see what questions, what curiosities you might have. And if you haven't already, please feel free to use the chat feature to submit your questions.
Hi, Diane. We did have one question come through.
What is
the best approach to communicating with a multi-generational team rather than an individual? Is it a mixture of all?
Well, it's a bit of a mixture of all, yes, and I understand that many of you might then think, oh, am I wearing 3 or 4 or 5 hats as I work with a multi-generational team? I would suggest that the default around communication is to first connect in person. And think about that, and particularly if that's easier, if that's what's comfortable for you. If that's not your preference, you might want to shore that up a bit. But that's the default. And then from communicating in person, the opportunity to get to know the members of your team and who they are. And as you think about your communication, and it probably can't always be face-to-face. Is it electronic? Is it text message? Is it I am? Is it picking up the phone? What becomes more important than the media or the method that you use is the frequency with which you communicate and the consistency with which you communicate. So I would say start in person, communicate frequently and with consistency, find out what different people prefer, and as often as you can acknowledge that preference, that's great. And probably the other key message about communication with a multi-generational team is you might find yourself listening more and talking less. Any other questions? Curiosities about the generations? Yes.
We do have one more. If the Gen X appreciates independence, how can we encourage knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer to younger employees?
Great question. And I think there are some generational strategies to consider, and your question highlights them. Oftentimes, it's the members of the silent generation and the baby boomer generation who are unconsciously competent. The work that they do is second nature. And the challenge around knowledge sharing is that if they're asked to share their knowledge, their concern is, well, if I share what I know, my knowledge is my power. Are you going to need me? So being cognizant of that and sensitive, that's why we talk about engaging in working out loud, right? As you're doing something, talking about it. It doesn't have to be special or unique, or it needs to be built into the work that you're doing. A strength that the Gen Xers bring to knowledge sharing is, while they are independent, they also see getting knowledge shared, getting people cross-trained, more folks knowing how to do things as an opportunity to get things done more efficiently and more effectively. So they see it as creating a flexibility, creating opportunities for more time. So sometimes that their desire to be respected for their work and life balance, their desire to have flexibility, can be a real seller or incentive to share knowledge or information. The other advantage that you might consider is oftentimes the relationship between Gen Xers and Millennials is a shared appreciation for technology. And then take advantage of how can you use that technology to facilitate or accelerate knowledge sharing. So I think that, understanding some of the preferences for the generations, the things that we've used to describe their generational personality, and then playing to those creates an opportunity for more knowledge sharing. And then I think there's something that organizations need to do. They need to be explicit that knowledge sharing takes time, energy, and effort. So if you want someone to share with somebody else how they do their work, or how they, initiate a repair, or how they analyze data, you need to give people time to make that happen. And it isn't necessarily about building databases. It's about people connecting and sharing their knowledge with one another. I hope that's helpful.
Great. Thank you, Diane, for an excellent presentation, and thank you all for participating. Keep an eye out for information on the recorded version for future replay, as well as a copy of the slides. And plan to attend Network ASA October 31st through November 2nd in Scottsdale, Arizona, where Diane will continue to help navigate different generations within the workplace. And Diane, I'll let you finish up this slide too.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a great close, and it gives me the opportunity to, as you go back, you have the opportunity to notice your workplace demographics, leverage the assets that each generation brings to the workplace. Think co-generational. The more multi-generational an organization is, the more successful they are. And that includes profitability, productivity, and satisfied customers. So co-generational is a good thing. Work to create that. Think about ways you can say yes to creating a more flexible culture. Be a role model of sharing your own knowledge and expertise, and be a mentor to newer, younger employees, a mentor to well-established employees who are looking at a different life stage and a change in their career. Be open to reciprocal mentoring opportunities where someone older can learn from someone younger and vice versa. And get your organization gen ready. Use the slides, the webinar recording, look for tips, tools, and techniques, many of which can be found on our website, to help people understand who are the multiple generations and what's important to connect, communicate, and create a climate that makes everyone successful. And finally, keep your workplace culture young. And that doesn't mean simply hiring young people. It means relishing a culture that is filled with curiosity and ongoing learning. Thank you so much. And as Jessica said, I look forward to seeing you at Network 2018 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Thank you very much for participating. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you again to Diane for this great program today and all of our participants. The webinar is now concluded. Have a great day.